Today we turn our attention to the latest chapter in the Israel-Gaza conflict, the Israeli military's continued offensive in Gaza City. It is a complex and deeply consequential operation, and we'll walk through what is happening on the ground, the tactics and design of the campaign, its strengths and vulnerabilities, and what sets this offensive apart from earlier operations. The aim here is to balance technical insight with explanations that everyone can follow. Gaza City is densely populated and urban, crisscrossed with old infrastructure, narrow alleys, residential towers, and subterranean tunnels. Over the past years, the city has already suffered extensive damage from bombing, blockades, and previous incursions. The Israeli forces are now engaging in a push to fully occupy or control Gaza City, moving from the outskirts inward. This new phase marks an escalation, as Israeli forces attempt to neutralize Hamas's military infrastructure and secure long-term control of key areas. One key feature of this offensive is the combined arms approach. Airstrikes, artillery barrages, precision munitions, armored ground forces, armored personnel carriers, remote-controlled explosive vehicles, engineering units to clear obstacles, and the use of intelligence and surveillance to guide operations. In earlier phases, Israel's forces heavily relied on aerial bombing and shelling to soften resistance, destroy infrastructure, and undermine Hamas's command, control, and logistics nodes. Over recent days, those air operations have been paired with ground incursions from multiple axes, pushing deeper into neighborhoods. A distinguishing characteristic of this offensive is the use of explosive-laden remote-controlled vehicles and armored robotic systems to breach barriers or enter contested zones without exposing troops directly. This raises the risk for defenders while reducing some direct troop casualties. Before major ground moves, Israeli forces often carry out mass air and artillery strikes to flatten or damage resistance points, sometimes dropping leaflets, broadcasting evacuation warnings, or cutting communications to sow confusion among defenders or civilians. In one operation, Israeli troops reportedly carried out around 150 air and artillery strikes as a prelude to ground entry. The timing and synchronization among the various components and explosions, Air Force, engineers, ground troops reflect a design meant to overwhelm resistance quickly, rather than a slow, attritional method. From a performance perspective, Israeli military statements claim they have taken control over roughly 40% of Gaza City and plan further expansion in coming days. They aim to dismantle Hamas's remaining infrastructure, control or neutralize tunnels and command centers, and eliminate fighters in urban areas. Reports indicate Israel is pushing into central and western areas of the city, where many civilians have hunkered down. Over 20 residential towers have been demolished recently, according to local sources, and more than 500,000 people have been displaced, though figures vary between Israeli and Palestinian accounts. Yet the performance is uneven. In dense urban terrain, clearing pockets of resistance is slow. Defenders can set up ambushes, use tunnels, deploy booby traps, or fight from concealed positions. Destruction of infrastructure also means movement becomes harder. Rubble, collapsed buildings, and broken roads slow advance and create choke. Moreover, the humanitarian constraint civilians trapped limited evacuation routes. Pressure from outside observers constrain how far and how fast forces can push. Another challenge comes from communications disruption. Israeli strikes have damaged telecommunications infrastructure, making it hard for defenders to coordinate and for civilians to receive warnings or orders. But this also means that Israel's own forces may have to contend with degraded situational awareness in some zones. The design of the operation involves trade-offs. There is the tension between speed and caution. A fast advance might catch defenders off guard, but in densely populated settings it risks higher collateral damage and civilian harm, which brings moral, political, and legal risks. Israel seems to be balancing heavy firepower with attempts at surgical precision, but critics argue that precision is limited in practice, especially in urban combat and with underground infrastructure. Another trade-off is over-reliance on air power. Airstrikes can soften resistance, but they cannot hold ground. Infantry and engineering units must follow to clear and secure zones, which means that the design must integrate multiple domain operations. From the Israeli perspective, one notable selling point is the effort to minimize troop casualties through the use of robotics, remote vehicles, and preliminary bombardment. By using remote systems to breach known danger zones, the aim is to reduce risk to human soldiers. By combining overwhelming firepower and selective ground penetration, the strategy hopes to degrade resistance rapidly, making it less feasible for Hamas to regroup or resist sequentially. The integration of intelligence drones, surveillance, and signal intercepts likely drives more precise targeting and tighter coordination. From a humanitarian lens, one design element is Israel's issuance of evacuation orders, opening humanitarian corridors or designated zones, and claims that hospitals will be protected sites while other areas may be targeted. Critics question how well evacuation is possible in practice given destroyed roads, lack of transport, and people unwilling or unable to move. Another distinguishing factor is the appearance of planning for permanent territorial control, rather than temporary raids or punitive strikes. Some observers, including United Nations reports, suggest the offensive is part of a broader plan to assert long-term control over Gaza, reshape its geography through buffer zones and corridors, and possibly reduce the region's habitability in certain areas. The human cost is immense. Hospitals are overwhelmed, medical supplies are limited, and civilians are displaced in vast numbers. Many hospitals are closing or under threat. The destruction of infrastructure means fewer safe routes, limited water, electricity, and sanitation, all of which complicate both civilian life and military operations. Legally and politically, this offensive faces intense scrutiny. United Nations human rights bodies have accused Israel of acts amounting to genocide or war crimes. Any strikes on protected civilian buildings or medical facilities, whether intended or not, draw condemnation and may impose constraints on how the operation is conducted. From a narrative or messaging perspective, Israel frames the offensive as necessary to eliminate Hamas, rescue hostages, provide security, and dismantle militant infrastructure entrenched in civilian zones. The messaging emphasizes surgical operations, warnings to civilians, and efforts to limit collateral impacts, though the effectiveness of such messaging is contested. To succeed, Israel will likely need to hold cleared zones, prevent re-infiltration, manage civilian safety, and reconstruct stability and sustain supply lines. Potential failure points include a drawn-out street fight, high casualties, international backlash, inability to secure rear areas, logistical bottlenecks, or underestimating the defenders' resolve and adaptability. What makes this offensive distinct when compared with prior Gaza operations are several factors. The scale and ambition of full city control. Rather than limited raids, the heavier use of robotic systems and remote explosive breaching to reduce risk. The integration of real-time intelligence and communications to drive more dynamic attacks. And apparent planning for post-conflict occupation or governance rather than just a quick military victory. It also carries symbolic and political weight, unfolding amid rising international recognition of Palestine and active scrutiny from international observers. For viewers following this development, the operation matters not only in military terms but also in human terms. Gaza City is home to hundreds of thousands of civilians, and the way the operation is conducted will shape lives, landscapes, politics, and the possibility of either peace or further conflict. Any misstep, inaccuracy, or disregard for civilian safety carries deep consequences that will resonate well beyond the battlefield.